Welcome to the second session of our Global Forum for National Trade Facilitation Committees on tangible solutions and approaches to empower NTFCs as coordinators of trade facilitation reforms. My name is Arantxa Sanchez and I'm part of UNCTAD Trade Facilitation team. Before handing over to the moderator and the speakers for this session, allow me to provide you a few logistics details. Please note that this session is being interpreted into English, French, and Spanish. You can choose your preferred language by presenting the globe icon at the bottom of the screen and choose the language you wish to listen to. Only panelists will be able to speak during their sessions. Attendees will, however, have plenty of opportunities to engage through the questions and answers sessions in most of the main sessions. To raise a question, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen and write your question. My colleagues will monitor the questions and we will filter these to the speakers. Throughout the various sessions, we will launch small polls, which we will appreciate if you could participate in. Please also note that today, illustrator Peter Murray will be live drawing the key takings of the session. We will show you his work in progress during the session. Without further delay, I would like to introduce to Mohammad Said, Chief of the Trade Facilitation and Policy Section for Business Section in the International Trade Center. The floor is yours, Said. Thank you.
Thank you, Arantxa. I hope I'm audible and visible. So good day to all the participants, the speakers, and the panelists. Let me share my screen with you just to can you see my screen? Okay. So welcome to the session and good day, keeping in view the participants from different time zones and across the globe. When I was asked to be the moderator of this session, I very happily accepted, but I was at a bit loss that how should I start the session? Yeah, because this is the first technical session. The morning session was only for the high-level speakers. I wanted to share something with you which can bring you to this mindset and the attitude of learning from the experts. And I'm very pleased to share with you that we have 4 experts today who will be sharing their experience from Madagascar, UK, Ecuador, and the Caribbean region. So I decided that I would share with you the work which ITC does in the area of trade facilitation and trade facilitation committees, which then share with you the lessons which we learned from that. As you will see, the ITC experience in supporting trade facilitation reform is quite diversified and quite extensive. We worked in about 80 countries, supported 40 plus Ntfcs, 50 plus TF reforms, and supported more than 15,000 businesses during the process. Oh, I can't change my screen because I think this poll is on. Arantxa, can I? There is, after you display the poll, I can't change my screen. Sorry, because of this technological hitch. Let me see if it can work now. No, unfortunately, I cannot. So now we can. So as you would see, the NTFCs was involved, and since Bali, the priorities of the NTFCs has also evolved, which started with awareness raising on TF, categorization and ratification, then TFA roadmaps, active TFA implementation, deep technical implementations. Then in 2020, mainly their priority was responding to COVID, and now they're more going to the dynamics and the SDG-led reforms. And to match our beneficiaries' needs, the TF delivery as well as the technical expertise has evolved over the years for ITC about 1,000% growth, which is a testimony to our beneficiaries and the donor trusts ITC programs. I just wanted to share with you a few lessons which we learned as NTFCs as coordinator of TF reforms. So the most important, the first lesson which we learned was that the NTFC have created stakeholders buy-in, that when you are in a room sitting with your other border regulatory agency or the private sector at an equal footing, then from the very beginning, it gives you a buy-in and the ownership of the TF reforms you are talking about. It also helped to foster interagency cooperation, because earlier, before the NTFCs, this was more kind of a turf issues, but now they started sitting in a room discussing TF reforms, that they are more collaborating. Being private businesses in the same room, so it brought the business perspective that how it is being felt by those who are the actual users. And then because it was the private sector as well as the regulatory agency, so it brought whole of the supply chain and the whole of the government approach in TF reforms. We also learned that those NTFC which has been ambitious or which has been more proactive, they experienced faster and more impactful reforms, which can be beneficial for the economy. And moving forward, those NTFCs and other NTFCs who are not yet, that they can further improve their contribution by investing more on monitoring, reporting, and evaluation of reforms. And you have seen this UNCTAD reform trackers, which is a tool, and we will be listening to it from our experts also. We have also been told by our beneficiaries that now our needs have evolved from simply implementing the TFA to the digital trade and the e-commerce, the fair trade, the inclusive trade for gender equality and gender responsive, the green, and even food security, or the countries which are conflict, hate. It can help also in the peace building, and NTFC are at the center of the reforms which are taking place. I think I have given you a context in which we will be listening to our experts. So I'll stop the screen sharing. And I'll invite my first speaker. My first speaker is, and I'm not reading out the bios in detail. They have very rich experience because their bios are available in the program which you have seen. My first speaker is Heraldo Dijau, who is head of the application of the international conventions at DG Customs Madagascar. He is currently leading a project within Customs to set up a permanent consultative dialogue framework, bringing all the stakeholders who interact with customs. I understand that Madagascar has also started recently, though, using the NTFC reform tracker developed by UNCTAD. Heraldo, please share your experience, what and how this coordination of NTFC is taking place in your country, and how this instrument has helped you to keep the track. Over to you.
Bonjour à tous.
Well, afternoon, everyone. I'm Iraldo Joe, as I was presented. I'm a member of the Ntfc Madagascar. Can you hear me? The sound quality isn't great, says the interpreter. Can you see the screen share? Can everyone see that? Thank you for UNCTAD for the invitation to this meeting for Madagascar. Congratulations for your organization. So I want to present the reform tracker, which is a tool that was recently implemented in our country, and it's greatly helped us in organizing our activities within the Ntfc. I'll give you some background first on the structure of the Ntfc. As elsewhere, the Ntfc is there to facilitate coordination and implementation of activities on trade facilitation at national level, but also all the reforms that stem from that. In our national committee, there are co-chairs, the Director General of Trade and Director General Customs, who co-preside the Ntfc. Then there's a permanent secretariat, 5 officials from the Ministry of Trade, 5 from Customs that I'm part of. We have 5 technical working groups working on various themes. So the RNFC was set up in 2016, and it's now fully operational.
D'accord.
Okay, could you put the full screen up, please?
Est-ce que vous pouvez partager depuis votre écran et puis je...
I wonder, could you share from, this is a conversation between the sound and the Mr. Zhao.
Il y a un collègue dans le chat qui dit c'est F5. Si vous utilisez F5, ça devrait ouvrir aussi.
Ok. C'est bon? Pas encore?
Non.
Non.
Je vais essayer d'ici une seconde.
Oui, s'il vous plaît, je vais arrêter le partage.
Si les collègues me donnent le droit de partager, je vais essayer comme ça. Maintenant, vous voyez maintenant? Ça va?
Je vais voir. Oui, je vois.
Je dois changer ici. Voilà. Normalement, c'est mieux comme ça.
Ok, je vois votre présentation. C'est lisible. Et donc, si vous permettez, je reprends ce que j'ai dit. Vous pouvez avancer.
Where I left off. So things started in 2021 when the committee, the Ntfc, asked UNCTAD for technical assistance. And UNCTAD responded that they would. At the time, we were given options for providing follow-up to all activities within the committee. So we integrated in agencies, the Madagascar agencies. There are 41 such agencies that are part of the NTFC platform. There are 107 users, and we have about 100 of programmed activities. At the start, 2 users, 2 country administrators were trained by UNCTAD. Recently, we had a consultant who was helping us. So recently, we had a general assembly in December. Many members stated their interest in the platform and want to join the platform. So the process of reforms, everyone adopted a step-by-step approach. We first integrated all the activities measure by measure, bit by bit. Then we have a roadmap listing all the activities covering 5 years. So what we did was we did some matchmaking with activities between the roadmap and the reform project, and it gives us a greater visibility when it comes to activities that are being implemented and related to the reform measures. There are other measures which don't include any specific activities. So it's and what we also saw greater ease in reading when it comes to reading through the activities, because the reform gives an overall overview of all the tasks. But if you visit the platform, there you have the option of supervisor. The supervisor gives you an overview of activities underway, of measures that don't include under them specific tasks. And this has allowed the permanent secretariat to make progress on activities that are on standby. Now, we organized outreach meetings with stakeholders to disseminate what the tools and to see how the tool could contribute to the Ntfc in general and to reinvigorate our technical working group. And through those outreach sessions, we had a lot of feedback from our members and people within customs and within the trade ministry initially. This allowed us to have feedback with UNCTAD to try and improve the tool. Currently, there's also progress in terms of following the tracking progress of activities. The reform tracker is developing functionalities that we can use to gauge the state of progress at a systematic level, not just manual, of activities within the reform tracker. So this facilitates management and coordination of activities within the Ntfc. So what have been the lessons learned? What difficulties have we encountered? It was mainly the unwillingness of users with regards to consolidating the reform tracker within the Ntfc. Is this going to be a tool that we're going to use over the long term? Then there's also the issue of confidentiality of official working documents, as has been reported. So we have discussed those issues, and the solutions included to make the documents more secure, because if you look at the tasks within the tracker now, there is an option where it says that the documents can only be seen by the reform teams. So not just anyone can go in and have a look at those documents. So it's only specific individuals that can go and consult those documents. Finally, so what's the challenge? What's the challenge for the NTFC? In October, we said the challenge was more to do with connection, because to open the reform tracker, we needed a higher broadband. So we needed greater internet facilities, capacities. But now the biggest challenge is to more engage stakeholders, to get them to use Reform Tracker when it comes to all activities linked to the NTFC. So there you have it, more or less, how our NTFC, how we have used the Reform Tracker so far. And hopefully there'll be new opportunities opening up in the future. And on behalf of the NTFC Madagascar, I want to thank you for organizing this event and thank you for inviting us. If there are any questions, please feel free to ask.
Thank you, Araldo, and thank you for sharing your experience, lessons learned, and especially the challenge. I fully share that the challenge of now having the stakeholders to work with you is the way that it will be more efficient, impactful, and sustainable. My next speaker for today is Orlando Kental, who heads the Department of the WTO Trade Facilitation and Capacity Building in Her Majesty's Revenue Customs of UK. We all know the UK's experience because the CITPRO from UK contributed a lot to learning of the working of the NTFC even before the TFA. UK has now recently set up their own new National Trade Facilitation Committee. And Orlando, could you please share your experience, how different instruments which you're using can ensure coordination among members of the NTFC? Orlando, floor is yours, please.
Great, thank you very much, Saeed. And well, you've given my introduction already, so I won't need to repeat that. But let me just start by saying a very warm thank you to UNCTAD for organising this week of events. I think this is really fantastic, and thank you very much for the invitation to speak today, and indeed for everyone else who's participating here and listening. It's really an honour to speak alongside a distinguished panel of colleagues as well. So I'll come on to the UK's experience of running an NTFC. I guess it's customary to acknowledge the importance of the TFA in these sorts of circumstances. There was obviously a very good session on this morning, so I think the value and the relevance of the TFA is very well known. And even negotiating the deal, of course, was a big step symbolically for the WTO, but quite clearly quality implementation is the important thing. And NTFCs have a very crucial role to play there. And that's why the UK has been very proud to support the UNCTAD Empowerment Programme since 2015, and have certainly welcomed some of the recent developments in the programme, such as the development of the Reform Tracker, as outlined very helpfully then by Araldo from Madagascar. So I'll explain a little bit about how the UK's NTFC is structured, and then I'm going to draw on some of our experience to just summarise what I think are a few lessons for running an effective committee. And I'll focus these around the three themes of ensuring your committee has a clear purpose, that it has sustainability, and that it is supported well by the people involved. So the UK's NTFC is co-chaired by two departments. So there's my department, which is the Customs Agency, HMRC, and also the Department for International Trade. So having a joint chair and a joint secretariat, I think, is quite helpful because it gives you a bit of extra leverage across government, and of course, a slightly different mix of expertise. The UK committee is cross-government, so we have a number of different departments and agencies with an interest in trade and trade facilitation, and a wide range of business stakeholders, including major business groups, sectoral groups, transport, ports, maritime, intermediaries like freight forwarders and software providers and so on. The group is quite strategic in that it meets about quarterly, and its remit is to identify areas for improvement in the UK, potential areas of underperformance, to monitor domestic strategies to address that. And we also use it as a focal point for engaging on some of the UK's international strategy around trade facilitation, including our capacity building work, but also our engagement with the WTO Trade Facilitation Committee. And I'll just answer a comment in the chat bar. No, I'm not using slides. I'm just talking today. So don't worry, you're not missing anything. So I'll come on to the first of those 3 points I mentioned. The purpose of your Ntfc, you need to develop sort of clear reforms and a work plan. Now, obviously, for most members, most countries, we know that the Ntfc is created and the obligation rather is in the Trade Facilitation Agreement, and it's clearly about implementing that agreement. The UK has already implemented its TFA obligations and performs pretty well in some international indicators like the OECD's. So you might ask, well, why do we have an Ntfc, or what does it focus on? Well, in the UK, like in really any country, there is certainly space for improvement. And the TFA, even if you have nominally implemented it, actually provides a very useful framework for mapping out not just whether you've implemented measures, but how, and the sort of depth of the implementation, if you like. And you can always learn more from others. In the UK Ntfc, in order to set out the agenda, we looked at the UK's performance in international benchmarking studies, in particular the OECD indicators, which are closely linked to the Trade Facilitation Agreement, and did some of our own benchmarking against comparable economies. And we agreed the list of priorities for the committee. These were broadly reflected in a publication the UK released just over a year ago, which was called the 2025 UK Border Strategy, which was launched to harness technology and find further simplifications for traders to improve the performance and simplify procedures in the UK border. These include developing a cutting-edge single trade window, developing an ecosystem of trust, which is essentially a way of using enhanced data from the supply chain and new technologies, for instance, digital seals on containers, to lower risking scores for trusted traders and try to move compliance away from the border. And another key aim was around paperless trade, so to make our trade processes fully digitalized where they aren't already. So that was on purpose. I said something about sustainability. So another word you might use here is permanence. And thank you, Saeed, for mentioning the example of CITPRO. So I'll give you sort of a candid reflection. So CITPRO was the UK's trade facilitation body between 1970 and 2010. So it had some longevity. CITPRO, by the way, stands for Simplifying Trade Procedures. It was a separate public body, actually incorporated as a limited company, with participants from industry and government that provided a very strong voice for trade facilitation in the UK. It was also active at a grassroots level, helping businesses trade. So as Saeed said, in some ways, it was a bit of a model for the Ntfc concept. This was ceased in 2010 as part of a broader decision in the UK to cut the number and the cost of public bodies, because we did have many at that time. It wasn't a decision singularly related to CITPRO or its value, but if I may be candid, I think maybe now that we've obviously recreated a committee, we've recognised areas for improvement in the border strategy, and indeed have an obligation to have a committee in the Ntfc, we may have found some way to keep some form of it going. So I think it is useful to think that you're not just sort of working towards implementing one agreement or one set of reforms. There is always going to be a new challenge or some new technologies to take account of. And trade facilitation itself is really a very permanent endeavour. We can always find ways to improve and learn from each other. Lastly, but certainly by no means least, I mentioned people. So as with anything you do, really, the people involved are paramount. I'm sure there are many colleagues around the world who are on their secretariat of their NTFC or participants in their NTFCs today. And I think having those relationships between people and expertise is incredibly important. My experience is that your chair and secretariat need to be very active between meetings, not just in meetings, building close relationships with government and industry colleagues, understanding the policy and the reality on the ground. Some examples of what I've found helpful, I've been to our member organizations, private sector representatives. I've presented to their memberships about the NTFC and about the UK's trade facilitation reforms and got direct feedback. I've done the rounds of our private sector colleagues to keep them engaged and encourage them to shape the agenda. And I think the quality of personal relationships is really important here. And of course, the people involved in your NTFC need to have the capability and the resources. So the Secretariat should be clear about how the NTFC will monitor and drive the reforms and what tools you will use, whether it's benchmarking reviews, dashboards, project plans, and of course, monitoring and evaluation tools. So the reform tracker, as I said before, is a very important development in this. So this is by no means an exhaustive list of what it means to run a good NTFC, and we could talk for a long time, and I'm sure other speakers will fill in some of the things I've left out, but just some pertinent points from our point of view. But look, thank you very much for listening. I'm very happy to expand or answer questions in the discussion.
Thank you, Orlando, especially keeping the time and focusing on the three key messages of purpose, sustainability, and people. And while you were speaking, I was recalling, I think it was 2016 or 17, UNCTAD has a publication which was based on the surveys about the National Trade Facilitation Committee, which exactly pointed out this, that the failure of the NTFCs, the finances plays an important role, but when it comes to success of any NTFC, then the work program is what ensures the success of NTFC. And thank you very much for sharing the experience. Now I'm given to understand that probably we are going to see the work of our artist who has scribed and scribbled some things for the participant, or should I go to the next speaker, Arantxa?
Maybe Sergio is going to, yes, Sergio is spotlighting the work of Pete, how he's progressing, how he's capturing the moderators and the speakers' interventions so far. So we can proceed now with the next person. I will help that person by sharing her presentation as well.
Thank you, Arantxa. And my next speaker is moving from Europe to South America, Carola Rios. She is from Ecuador, and she's a business administrator specializing in foreign trade and have an experience of 25 years in the private sector. And Ecuador is also one of those countries who have started using recently the reform tracker developed by UNCTAD, which we have been listening to. So Carola, could you please share the experience of Ecuador in using this, and also any other lessons for coordination of the TF reforms by the NTFC? Over to you.
Buenos días, qué gusto saludarlos desde Ecuador.
Good afternoon. I'm very pleased to greet you from Ecuador. I am the Vice President of the National Trade Facilitation Committee in Ecuador. I'm particularly pleased to be able to address you here this afternoon and tell you about our experience since we signed up to the TFA. I'd like to give you an idea of Ecuador's commitment to trade facilitation. We can move on to the next slide, please. So, what you can see on the screen is our legal framework, which is the basis for our implementation of the commitments contained in the agreement. Ecuador established the committee in 2019 on the basis of a ministerial agreement. And so the committee is the guiding entity for the foreign investment policy at the borders, and also we're in charge of health monitoring in our country as well for imports. We have an executive decree which bolstered our mandate. In July 2021, the President of the Republic made trade facilitation a policy priority. In November of last year, we strengthened the committee's framework with the adoption of the organic law for economic development and tax sustainability post-COVID. We included the transport authorities in the guiding committee, the steering committee. One of the committee's decisions has been to establish a road map. This was adopted in May of last year. We have been provided with technical assistance by UNCTAD in order to implement that roadmap. We can move on to the next slide now. So, when it comes to technical assistance, in July of last year, Ecuador had public and private sector representatives and from academia in the UNCTAD course. The aim of this was to improve our knowledge about the provisions for trade facilitation in the WTO. There were a considerable number of participants from Ecuador in that course. Let's move on to the next slide, please. Then we had a series of reforms which were under monitoring system. This has been very helpful to the committee. We've been able to attribute responsibilities to various members. Since October, we've had support from an UNCTAD consultant, which has led to 28 meetings being held. We have 98 registered users from Ecuador on the platform, including both public authorities and representatives from the private sector. The reform has enabled us to classify members of the National Secretariat and those who are responsible for executing the tasks which we monitor, so we can see how often this tool is being used. And this was adopted in January of this year. It gives us an overview then of the indicators. This is absolutely vital for measuring the country's progress in implementing the provisions for trade facilitation. If we look at the data which has been input since October of last year, we've seen that there's been 28% execution of activities, and there are 61% which are ongoing. They've already been initiated but haven't been completed yet. The reform tracker has enabled us to monitor how many tasks are given to each agency. We can also map the execution rate, and we can also identify the number of users which are supposed to be implementing the reforms. So as far as Ecuador is concerned, Article 10.4 of the one window shop or one window is very important for us. We've seen that there are 28 users who are responsible for these tasks. We also have a chapter on cooperation, which sees what kind of assistance we need and how much progress is being made. The reform tracker also includes the US-Ecuador protocol, which has an annex on trade facilitation. This enables us to identify the progress being made towards harmonization with the WTO agreement. The reform tracker has also enabled us to look at interinstitutional execution. We do this through both public sector and private sector participation. We believe that the reform tracker will improve sustainability and ensure that the committee has better documentation, there is better transfer of knowledge between agencies, and ensuring that there's good articulation between the various stakeholders. It's also contributing to empower the committee. It helps map out the work to be undertaken by different private and public entities and enables us to monitor the rate of execution, the progress that we're making. This means so that we have clear organization of our activities and who is responsible for what. We can easily track progress being made on the commitments entered into under the Trade Facilitation Agreement. So this is Ecuador's experience with this tool, this reform tracker, and I'll be happy to take any questions you might have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carola. And thank you very much for bringing this fresh perspective. Normally, when we are talking about the National Trade Facilitation Committees, we remain focused on the Trade Facilitation Agreement or the trade facilitation in a broader terms. But thank you very much for sharing that the NTFC in Ecuador has also been steering the foreign direct investment. And I think the investment has a direct relationship with the trade facilitation. Let me share for the benefit of the audience and everybody, that ITC is implementing a project called Investment Facilitation for Development to support the negotiations which are going on under the GSIs with the German funding as well as with the Columbia University. And I was asked to write a small piece called FTA Perspective, how investment facilitation can be supported and learning from the PFA experience. And thank you very much for flagging that. Thank you. My last, but in no way the least, next speaker is Michelle Love, a longtime associate from Caricom Secretariat. Thank you very much, Michelle, for making yourself available to participate today. Michelle is in charge of coordinating the work of NTFCs in the Caribbean region, and I'm sure we are all privileged to be listening to such a rich experience. Michelle, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Said, and I want to thank UNCTAD and the organizers for inviting me and the Caricom Secretariat and Caricom in general to participate and to share our experience. I'm going to go right to my slide. The Caribbean community consists of 15 developing small island and continental states, one of which is an LDC, and that's Haiti. 13 of those countries, as you know, are WTO members and are adopting a coordinated regional approach to implementing the TFA. And since 2017, our ministers of trade approved a strategy to guide regional coordination and implementation of TFA and TF reforms generally. And in 2019, the CARICOM Regional Committee on Trade Facilitation was inaugurated to oversee that regional coordination process. So I'm going to very quickly answer 3 questions. Why adopt a regional approach? How have we done it, and with what results? Why, firstly, is because the TFA creates that space for regional coordination, not only with respect to implementing the technical measures, but also with respect to coordinating TACB support and mobilization of resources. Secondly, for us, it's in terms of how we locate regional integration in the context of TFA implementation, and how you leverage TFA implementation to support regional integration. So the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, which establishes the Caricom single market, provides for that coordination and harmonization of customs and trade facilitation reforms, including SPS and TBT measures. And so the community, as I said, is leveraging TFA implementation to achieve a number of strategic objectives. Key among those objectives is supporting and catalyzing regional integration through the adoption of coordinated and harmonized trade facilitation reforms across our member states. And our ministers of trade have issued a number of mandates which have guided the coordination process. And I've put some of those mandates here. How have we been doing this regional coordination? First, we have 2 key instruments that are supporting regional coordination efforts. The first is a regional strategy, which was prepared with the kind support of the World Bank Group. And that is a strategy for coordination of technical assistance and capacity building initiatives at the regional level. The strategy identifies a number of priority technical assistance and capacity building needs and initiatives which are aligned to national priorities. And it's very important to have that alignment. So the strategy identifies 18 priority measures that have been commonly notified by our member states as category C measures. The strategy importantly creates a framework on which to design and deliver these regional projects. It supports regional coordination by rationalizing the cost of implementation of the agreement for member states through the adoption of coordinated and harmonized approaches where feasible. And it also creates a common framework for mobilizing donor resources for TACB support for implementation of regional support measures. And we've been doing this successfully. And what we find is that it helps to rationalize the use of scarce donor resources through these regional interventions. The second instrument is a regional committee on trade facilitation. And this regional committee provides the institutional framework for that regional coordination process. It's guided by terms of reference that were approved by our ministers of trade. It has an annual work plan, again, approved by our ministers of trade. It is supported by the Caricom Secretariat and the OECS Commission, which are technical secretariats, which perform administrative, technical, and legal advisory functions. We want to ensure as well that the composition of the committee reflects all the stakeholders that have to be present at the table. So it brings together not just the Ntfcs from all our member states, but it also brings together some regional committees, for example, our customs committee, some regional bodies, and importantly, the regional private sector. It reports at least twice yearly to ministers of trade through the secretariat. And there's a standing item on the agenda of our quoted, that's a ministerial body, which provides updates on global and regional developments which impact TFA implementation and regional coordination. What has been the scorecard very quickly? We've had 4 years of implementation. I think there has been a decent scorecard. We've had some tangible results. I've put some here and we can perhaps expand on those in the discussion, but I'd like to go quickly to some lessons learned. For us, first of all, effective regional coordination, we find, can spur national momentum. It can identify and fill implementation gaps at the national level, and it has done so. But it does require strong commitment at the national and regional level to support and to drive that regional agenda. You also have to have that, that process which ensures coherence and consistency between the national and the regional priorities. You also, another lesson is that a robust network of NTFCs can drive that momentum at the national level. But the reality is that not all 13 member states are at the same stage of implementation of the TFA. Some are more organized, some are more active. Some countries are further down the implementation curve than others. And for this reason, the strategy that we have adopted allows for sequencing, but in a coordinated manner. And in some cases, you may have to identify national champions, national NTFCs that are champions that can serve as sort of cheerleaders of the regional process. You also need very robust private sector engagement and involvement to drive that public-private dialogue in the context of the RTFC. This is where we have a challenge in the region. Our private sector involvement could be more robust. As it is, we have only 2 regional organizations that are members of the RCTF, but we do have others that have recently organized themselves. We have a regional manufacturers association. There is a Caricom private sector organization, which is an associate body of the community. And so we expect that over time, the private sector representation and presence will grow on the body. The last lesson has to do with the need for ongoing consultation, communication, to ensure ownership at the national level and commitment to this regional coordination process. Lastly, we've had some headwinds, not surprisingly. As I said, our strategy is a strategy that's guided by the whole notion of mobilizing and coordinating at the regional level, technical assistance and capacity building. And there are geographical and eligibility criteria that are attached to the use of some donor resources, which impact negatively on regional coordination efforts. So in a number of ways, you may have one set of countries that are eligible and another set that are not. And therefore, what it does is that it creates an additional effort to identify multiple streams of donor support. There's also the issue of the fact that although the TFA provides the space for regional coordination, the TFA commits and creates national obligations, and the TFC is member driven. And therefore, there is some amount of obstacles as it relates to how you participate, how you support at the global level, this national process. So in a number of ways, we find that national notifications, national reportings do not necessarily capture the full picture of implementation at the regional level, particularly as it relates to how you notify TACB support. For example, Caricom has benefited from a project, the first regional project under the TFAF. You need all members to notify that, but you have that gap in notification. Last point, and this this is a major risk for us in terms of sustainability, is a need for a dedicated set of resources, budgetary support to drive and support the regional coordination process. In our case in Caricom, we depend inordinately on external resources for that. So there's no budgetary allocation to support the regional coordination efforts. And I believe that this reliance on external resources to undertake regional initiatives is a major risk for sustainability for us. So I'm going to leave it there and hope that we can perhaps have a greater discussion on some of the outcomes and the successes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you very much. Being the last speaker, now I will open the floor for the questions, but abusing my powers as a moderator, I have the first question, Michelle, for you. Thank you very much for sharing the experience of the Regional Trade Facilitation Committee. My question is that what is the composition of this Regional Trade Facilitation Committee in the Caricom region, and how this committee interacts with the National Trade Facilitation Committee of different countries? Or is there a regular mechanism to share the information, or their members participate in the Regional Trade Facilitation Committee? Please, Michelle. So I'll start putting you on the spot to answer this question, please. And to all the participants, please share your questions. We already have few questions, but we will welcome. We want to make it as interactive as possible to answer your questions. Michelle, over to you.
Thank you very much for that, Said. So there was a slide up, so let me just indicate. So the committee brings together all of the chairs of the National Trade Facilitation Committees in the 13 member states. It brings together as well the trade officials from all member states, and these trade officials are typically the ones who will attend TFC meetings. There is a representative from the Regional Customs Committee, and the Customs Committee provides technical advisory advice both to trade ministers and to the committee as it relates to technical customs matters, customs policy. We have representatives from CAFSA, which is our Agriculture and Health Safety Organization, which deals with the plant and animal health issues in terms of border. It brings together as well CROSCU, which is our standards body. And therefore you have that sort of technical interagency type of representation there. We have currently 2 regional private sector bodies which are represented, one that represents customs brokers and the other that represents the chambers of commerce. And it's a network of chambers of commerce, not just across Caricom, but across the Caribbean. And as I said, it is supported by the secretariats, the OECS and the Caricom secretariat. As it relates to how it interfaces with the NTFCs, the very fact that the NTFCs actually are part of the regional committee, and because of the online mode that we have gone into, the fact is that a regional committee brings together every single member of a national committee to engage, to participate in the regional process, regional coordination process and dialogue. In between meetings of the TFC, we have a quick consult mechanism that we use. And that quick consult mechanism is comprised of trade facilitation contact points in all member states. And so in that way, the Secretariat is able to quickly disseminate information to these trade facilitation contact points, who are typically the trade officials that participate on the national committees. I hope I have provided a proper understanding to you in terms of how it operates.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you very much. I have a question for Aroldo. That how is data uploaded to the platform? And I'm assuming that platform means the reform tracker which he presented. Are the various entities uploading their own progress report, or there is some centralized mechanism to upload the data? Arlando, floor is yours.
Oui, donc merci pour la question. Déjà, tous les trucs
All measures were taken by the working group on all project teams can put forward their figures. Now, there are country administrators who enter that data in line with the document used as the reference point. And now, how to calculate for calculating progress, there's a new functionality that will be established. So everyone, even those who haven't sent in the documents, everyone can get an idea of the progress made in each activity. If you look at the reform tracker at the end, there's the implementation checklist, which sets out the elements that need to be factored in for measuring progress for each NTFC reform. This can therefore calculate the progress made on whichever element it may be, and it allows the administrators to validate the checklist so as to be able to see the rate of progress for any measure. So basically, anyone can send in, therefore, their data into Reform Tracker. In terms of users, it's up then to the administrators to validate it. And everyone can also exchange documents when you're a member of the platform within mainly in Reform Tracker. Thank you.
Thank you, Araldo. I have two questions for Arlando. I think it is from one of my compatriots from Pakistan. The first question is that how much do you value having NTFC institutionalized in the executive system of developing countries? I assume that the person is referring to the bureaucratic structure or the regular line ministry structure, because you say we at times experience a fluid NTFC with no institutionalization. And the second question in the same vein is that considering the experience of CITPRO and how it evolved into the NTFC in UK, could you enlighten how important is domestic market connectivity in truly benefiting from TFA and NTFC in general? I'm sure they are asking about the UK experience. Orlando, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mohammed. So I think as we've been focusing on in this session, having an NTFC is very important for countries implementing the TFA. And I think I can speak on behalf of the UK and say we'd strongly encourage countries to institutionalize NTFCs, as I mentioned in my presentation, quite securely. So I think with senior sponsorship, with a clear terms of reference, and to really look to make those permanent bodies as far as possible. And yeah, I think the point about some kind of senior buy-in is very important, because it gives you some of that security and that longevity. I wouldn't necessarily be prescriptive about whether it has to be a certain type of governance. It could just be it doesn't have to have maybe a separate legal status. CITPRO did in the UK, but our current NTFC doesn't. It's just a committee, but it has clear terms of reference, and it was set up with the approval of ministers. On the question about domestic market connectivity, I'm sort of interpreting this a bit, but I think this is about the engagement of market actors and businesses. And obviously, the TFA makes it easier to trade, reduce the costs of trading to some degree. But clearly, you need businesses to take advantage of that. Your NTFC needs to communicate well, I think make businesses aware of the changes, encourage them to trade more. I think there's also very much a gender angle to that, and it's important to recognise that the engagement needs to be reaching SMEs, which are often sort of disproportionately women-led. So I think that's important too. I mean, in the UK experience, CIPRO, like I said, was active at the grassroots level. But on our committee today, some of our private sector members have really excellent outreach to businesses across the country, in chambers of commerce around the country, and they're very helpful in pushing communications to their members. So I think that is really important.
Thank you, Orlando. Now, I have two questions for Michelle. One is that have you done an evaluation of all the member states to show who and how TFA generates benefits? And the second is that how do you keep chairs of those national committees proactive and interested more in these reforms? Haven't you ever experienced their absence where they send their representatives instead? And how do you manage it? Michelle, floor is yours.
Thank you, Said, and those are two interesting questions. I attempted to answer Raymond's question in the chat by indicating, no, we have not done a sort of a scientific evaluation. There is constant monitoring of the progress, but that monitoring really depends a whole lot on member states reporting. And in a number of ways, one of the challenges that we face for coordination is that there typically tends to be a one-way flow of information from the secretariat, the coordinators, to the member states. And therefore, in a number of ways, you have some countries that will report and provide the updates, but what you have to do in a number of cases is convene these meetings of the trade facilitation focal points, formal meetings which allow for this kind of reporting. And then, yes, there is need for this kind of evaluation of benefits, a systemic kind of evaluation, but that has not been done. As it relates to how you keep the member states engaged and driven, we have been using the regional committee to share experiences, to share national experiences amongst the member states. And in that way, that regional sharing of experience and the best practices and expertise has, I think, created a level of interest in quite a few of our member states that tend to be a little less organized and functional. Following these shared experiences, I usually get an email saying, I am really happy to see what is happening in X country. Can you assist me to get some assistance to do X and Y? And this is one of the benefits, I believe, of the regional coordination, certainly as it relates to donor mobilization, that we can bring all the experts or the donors together, perhaps in one room, and member states can see the resources. And this is a nature of the strategic partnership that we're developing with UNCTAD. UNCTAD has been a long-standing partner with us, and we're hoping that certainly in terms of rolling out the reform tracker in the Caribbean, we can use it to assist countries and to spur that kind of momentum at the national level. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Currently, I don't see any questions from the participant. There are certain questions which have been answered by different panelists and my UNCTAD colleagues in the chat box. But if you have any questions, please send it to us. We still have some time and we can try to answer those questions.
Thank you. I spotted a couple of questions for me in the chat, so I'm happy to address those.
Please, Orlando, please go ahead.
So I had a question sent to me directly from, sorry, I'm scrolling back, Veronica from the Norway Ntfc. So thank you for this. So this is a question about the membership and the participants of the UK Ntfc. So we have 18 private sector organisations and 8 government departments involved. Those government departments sometimes have sponsorship of other agencies, so they might bring in colleagues. Our participants in a typical meeting will fluctuate, but will sometimes be up to 50 or 60 people. But there was a related question, sorry, from Chantal, I think. So asking about the membership. So I've answered that. Said, in your experience, how do you see NTFCs being led by private sector? And how does the NTFC in the UK support small cross-border traders? As I said before, I think it's really important to have private sector members who have like good outreach and good communication channels. So I think that's very important. In the UK, the NTFC doesn't do everything on its own. I mean, we do have a lot of other schemes for supporting exporters run by the Department for International Trade, for instance. So I think it's sometimes in certain sectors or looking at export specifically, you might also want to have other processes in place to engage traders, depending on the resource and capacity of your NTFC.
Thank you, Orlando. I see a question from Govinda from Nepal. That Nepal is in the early stage of implementing TFA by establishing NTFC. And I recall that ITC is supporting Nepal for establishing the NTFC. Our colleague wants to know that in this context, I want to know from the experience of the expert that how to make NTFC more functional and operational to achieve TFA reforms by engaging different stakeholders. So it is a kind of an open questions. So anybody takers, Orlando, maybe first you can take it, and then I'll ask other colleagues, Michelle and Iraldo, if they can have some advice.
Yeah, thank you for referring the question to me. So I think, as I alluded in my presentation, engaging with stakeholders between the meetings is a really important part of the chair and secretariat's role. I think you also need to find the right balance. So it's not necessarily just about speaking to the stakeholders who can talk the loudest. I think you might want to also do some analysis of the different sectors that are involved in trade, but also potential areas for growth. And regularly review the membership to make sure that it's staying up to date, I think, as well.
Thank you. Michelle, you want to have your take on this question from Nepal? That is real South-South learning. I don't.
Thank you very much. So from a national perspective, I wouldn't be able to, I wouldn't be able to speak authoritatively there, but certainly as it relates to creating a functional and operational space in terms of the NTFC. As Orlando has said, important thing is to ensure that you have the right stakeholders at the table. You have to ensure that you also create a good communication plan for engaging the stakeholders. It's also good to, I think, in terms of beginning to have an understanding of a sort of a roadmap in terms of what are the reforms that are aligned with the national developmental priorities, that national development strategies, and how therefore you're going to sequence those. That kind of bedrock foundational bedrock in terms of the planning process is going to be very important. So that conceptualization phase, I believe, is key. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. I read another question, and I guess probably this is going to be the last question, if not the second last. That what is the difference between the technical groups of custom and of border agency coordination and single window? Who wants to answer that? If my panelists are not taking this offer, let me try to share my experience. Look, the single window is a kind of mechanism or a facility where all the border agencies are connected, preferably all, but if not, those which are involved in the frequent shipments. And it is basically processing a kind of a system, whereas the technical groups which are created as part of the single window, some people call it a working group, some call technical committee, some called subgroups. These are the thematic issue specific groups involving the different stakeholders, both from the regulatory bodies as well as from the private sector, and given a task which is usually time limited, that you discuss and come up that how these different issues which are facing in this special thematic area can be addressed. And then those recommendations goes to the bigger committee, and that bigger committee adopts those recommendations, whereas the single window is a kind of operational for regulatory compliance, a mechanism where all these agencies participate. But still, if any of my experts want to add, supplement, or say something, most welcome.
Oui, par rapport à la question de Eswatini, en fait,
On Eswatini, there was a question if there were new people, were the same people since the creation of the NTFC. There have been changes, as you mentioned, that took place. So just going back to 2016, there are people who have come and gone, but we're trying to sort of rejuvenate the technical working group to reinvigorate, and Reform Tractor helps us identify the best people who's best placed to advance measures in their department. So there are some people who have been there and we work with them, and others who get training together so that progress can really be impactful when it comes to the NTFC working groups. And in terms of the difference between the technical working group on customs measures and the border data coordination group, the difference is that when the measures exclusively are the purview of customs, then we speak of measures, decisions, or when determining tax rights, that's exclusively customs competence when it comes to tax rights. Now, with GCF, that's going to include other stakeholders who work in the issue of border management, and so that's for a different technical working group that will be addressing that issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Aldo. The last question which I want to pose to my experts is from Sierra Leone. It says that Sierra Leone has established the Ntfc to help with the implementation of the TFA. However, we still have challenges when it comes to setting up a functional secretariat. Can enacting a TFA regulations through Parliament be of any help? So please, anybody who wants to take? up this. Orlando, Michelle, Geraldo. We are sorry that the Carola has left us from Ecuador. She has some other engagement, but any of you?
I'm happy to
please
make an initial answer.
Please, Orlando.
Thank you. I think it's important. We all know that there is no one-size-fits-all approach for NTFCs across different countries. Now, if I was thinking about this question in the UK, I suppose regulations might be used to give an NTFC legal powers, so it can mandate things or to give it a separate legal status, which is actually what CIPRO had in the UK. It isn't the way we've gone with the UK's NTFC. It is less formally constituted than through an act of legislation. Often parliaments can be very busy, so sometimes that might be easier to set up an NTFC more quickly. But I could see there might be some benefits if you want it to have additional powers. But in the UK, our body is a more strategic one that then brings departments together, agrees what to do, and then the departments will lead on legislation where it's needed for the reforms.
Thank you, Orlando. And before handing back the floor to Arantxa and our artist who has been creating some visuals for you, this is the time to thank all the participants and especially my experts. It was a wonderful session, very engaging. I wish we were there to have a round of applause, but we can have a virtual clap for all the experts who have spared their times and shared their experiences. Thank you very much. And thank you to all. And over to Arantxa for showing us some artistic work. Arantxa, you.
Yes, thank you very much for this fantastic session, for the amazing chat activities we have been having, all the participants so engaged, the presentations from the speakers, it was amazing. I would like to ask my colleague Sergio to show the amazing work of our live artists that we will be sharing in our different platforms. Also, just to remind you that this has been the first day out of 3 more fantastic dates that we have prepared with you with amazing sessions. Tomorrow we will have an incredible session about measuring and monitoring the performance of NTFCs, where we will continue the discussions that we had today about how to monitor and implement the Trade Facilitation Agreement, so don't miss it up. Check your inboxes because there might be a different link to join that session tomorrow, so be careful about that. And this is, we also wanted to ask the technical colleagues to show the results of the evaluation poll we just shared with you, if they could do that as well. For the remaining questions, my colleagues and I, we will be trying to answer them in the next couple of minutes. And otherwise, we keep the conversation tomorrow. So thank you very much. And Sergio, just share the screen, and we will leave the picture of the artist for you to have a look at. Thank you very much to everyone.